So further to the chat I've had with a few people on Instagram, had a couple of questions about how I edit and process the photos I post there, so I just thought it'd be interesting to put this video together. This is a raw image of Phoenix, my Phonopelma calcodes. Now you'll see that it's pretty much desaturated. There's not a lot of detail in it at first glance, but with a raw file, every single bit of information that your camera's sensor has captured is in there. The way to think of it is like a film negative from the past, whereby your camera gives you this negative with all of the data possible, and you can then process it using relevant software. I use a Lightroom subscription from Adobe. You can find out about that on their Creative Cloud website, etc. But I've always found it relatively easy to use. So I'm just going to take you through what I'm going to do with this picture. So the first thing I usually do is pick a color profile based on the camera I'm using. So I'm going through to camera matching. There are different sort of color profiles. This is just sort of like a lookup table for colors based on how you want the image processed, really. So vivid is way too far. Portrait's relatively neutral, but I'm going to start from a landscape profile because I find it gives a little bit more depth to the photo straight away. Now the first thing we need to do is to look at the light panel. This is your exposure, contrast, highlights, shadows, and the black and white levels of the photo. Now luckily it looks like this is a pretty good exposure, so I shouldn't have to do too much. If I increase the exposure, you can see it blows out. If I decrease the exposure, we go to nothing, so you can see that. Now what I'm looking to do is to see at the point where we start to see the right detail in the darkest areas, but we're not seeing the whites blow out. So I've only increased that exposure by a slight bit. Next thing I'm looking for is contrast in the image. So again, not too much, just a subtle bit of contrast to the image there. So already two very subtle steps, and we've started to make this photo look a lot better. I'm going to take the highlights down because I notice in these areas of the image they're a little bit pokey, so I'm just going to take those down a bit. The shadow areas I'm going to raise just slightly, just see if I can get any more detail in the dark legs of Phoenix. You'll notice where I'm pointing here, this particular leg is not getting a lot of detail back into it because it's in a bit of shadow. Now what I'm going to do there, I'm going to paint this area and manipulate it on its own to see if I can bring any more shadows there. It may work, it may look rubbish. That looks more in line with the rest of the photo and doesn't look too unnatural now, so I'm going to go with that. Okay, the whites I'm going to bring down slightly again, and the blacks I'm going to just raise ever so slightly. Right, okay, so now we've got the colour. The thing about raw files as well, when you shoot a JPEG with your phone or your camera, your phone has done all of the processing for you. Everything it has done is selected. It throws away a load of data and says, look, this is what I think I want the image to look like. I hope you like it. And that's the best you're going to get. Whereas with the raw file, if I don't like the colour temperature of the white balance that's been chosen, I can warm that up slightly, which I'm going to do to be closer to Phoenix's actual colours. Again, I was using an artificial light for this photo, so sometimes your camera may get it slightly wrong. So it's only a slight adjustment, but it looks a little better to me. I'm going to go, looking at the vibrance, you see you can get one of those Instagram filter type things if you get the vibrance up to 100. So that's not what we want. That just looks absolutely amateurish and shoddy. I'm just going to bump it ever so fractionally so we can see a bit more of the blonde coming through there. Again, with the saturation, if you want to see a true Instagram photo, there you go. You know, the ones that make the Harpactira pulchripes look like they're radioactive from Mars. Awful. But yeah, that looks relatively subtle. Again, this is just a simple edit. This is going to take me a couple of minutes at most. I love to add a bit of texture to the image because that brings out the detail and the sharpness of the lens and the sensor. Tiny bit of clarity. Don't overdo the clarity. You see so many photos that are just sharpened to hell looking like this, and they just come across as very artificial. Again, it's personal preference, experiment and play with it, but I prefer just to be a little subtle on that. Dehaze is something that's useful if you're in an area where there's a lot of mist affecting the background. It's not really relevant to this, but I'll show you what it does. So it's like an algorithm that cuts through the haze in the photo. So I'm just going to leave that where it was. And the vignetting is sort of corner vignetting to sort of frame your subject. If you like that kind of effect, you can go extreme with it, which looks like, you know, 2006 MySpace profile pictures shite, but I think sometimes you'll see it, just a subtle vignette there, and that's looking, it's subtly bringing me towards Phoenix's eyes, which are the focus of the photo. So again, it doesn't need any noise reduction or anything like that. Last thing I'm doing is removing chromatic aberration, which is just a correction for whichever lens you're using, and I think I'm quite happy with that. So you can see now the after and the before. So you can see I've not done a lot with it. It's not exaggerated, but it's gone from looking incredibly flat to actually looking like a photograph. And it's just something to practice and playing around with. If you're getting into your photography, switch the camera over to RAW, get yourself something to process it in, and play around and be a bit artistic and creative with it. So hopefully you've enjoyed that. If you want to see more photography stuff, just comment and ask, talk to me on Instagram. If you're a beginner like me, or at an earlier stage than me, I'm still a beginner with this. I'm by no means a fantastic photographer. But if you need a hand taking your first steps, or you need some advice, again, drop me a message, more than happy to talk. So hopefully you enjoyed the video.